Have we achieved much over the past 25 years?
Over the past?
25 years.
Well, I think yes, we have. I think we've stabilized South African society coming out of a terrible situation before 1994. And there has been service delivery. I mean, it's a lie to say that the African National Congress has not delivered. It delivered on many levels of electricity supply, of housing, not enough, but yes, it delivered. At the same time, I think we have to acknowledge also that not enough had been done, and that much more can still be done to improve the lives of the majority of people in South Africa. But the challenge that we have is that we can only do that if we are truly prepared to work on the structure of this economy. Our economy is still dominated by white monopoly capital. The basic economic superstructure is still what it was before 1994. And those who are in control of this economy are white monopoly capitalists. So within that context, we've managed to achieve much. Within that context, we were able to address some of the most urgent needs of our people. And we must emphasize what we have done with regards to social grants. We've really managed to lift millions of people out of dire poverty to a point where they at least can be on a subsistence level. But if we want to change that, if we want to truly improve people's lives, then we must make sure that we can do radical economic transformation. And that's the challenge. And the challenge now is that we hear from the people in South Africa that they're not prepared to just allow the African National Congress to continue to tinker with this economic situation without changing the fundamentals. Everywhere where I go, and I've been campaigning with the Secretary General of the ANC through the length and the breadth of this country. I've been to townships in every province, and the message is clear. We cannot continue like this. We're tired of this dire poverty. We're thankful for what the ANC has managed to do in these circumstances. But now you have to break it open. Now you have to make the radical changes that are required in order to empower the majority of people. There's good things that happened. What former President Jacob Zuma did when he introduced free education for the poor is a great development. And it has opened opportunities up for literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of poor and indigent students. But the reality is, if we do not address these economic fundamentals, South Africa is heading for a crisis.
Okay, so while the governing party is going through a tough time, surely there are gains made that we should all be proud of.
Well, as I've indicated to you, yes, I'm proud of what we have achieved in terms of overall poverty alleviation, what we have achieved for free education for the poorest of the poor, the infrastructure that has been provided with regards to electricity and housing to many millions of people. You're right, the ANC is going through a tough time. But the reason why the ANC is going through a tough time is because it is an organization that is rooted in the grassroots of South Africa. So the problems and the challenges that people are experiencing at that level comes up and also raises fundamental questions within the ANC. And for the ANC, the time will come very soon to take very, very critical decisions on whether it is going to be a middle class, perhaps even pro-bourgeois party, that will continue to allow the current economic structure to continue, or whether it's going to respond to these challenges that come to us through the grassroots from the majority of poor and especially African people. I believe that the African National Congress has to deliver on the second challenge, the latter. That is, we must address the issues that concerns the poorest of the poor, because that is our support base. Our support base is not white suburbia. It's not the green and leafy suburbs. It is where I was yesterday in Tlokwe in Potchefstroom, where people are complaining about basic issues such as housing, water supply, poor sewage, poor sanitary conditions, lack of income, huge unemployment. And that is true for townships and for informal settlements throughout South Africa. That is what we have to address, because those are the people, since 1994, who every election voted the ANC into power. The loyalty of the majority of poor people in South Africa to the ANC and the brand of the ANC is amazing. The ANC has to deliver to that support base. We are in power because of them, not because of Sandton, not because of Bryanston, not because of the beautiful leafy suburbs of the Western Cape and of Bishop's Court. We are in power because of the people of Soweto, because of the people of all the other townships. And those are the people who deserve the African National Congress to deliver to them and to be sensitive to their needs.
South Africans are often clouded by issues of corruptions and other social ills, and perhaps blinded to the achievements made. Would you agree with this statement?
I absolutely agree with that statement. And you know, issues of corruption are important. They have to be addressed. But I've also seen all over the world that often there's a tendency to take the liberation movements and try and taint them with that tar brush of corruption in order to destroy them. Let us remember that the biggest corruption that we faced in South Africa has never been since 1994. And I'm not saying that in order to justify any corruption that there may have been and have been under the African National Congress. But the biggest corruption in this country came from whites and from white monopoly capital. We mustn't forget that when the ANC came into power, we inherited a massive debt, which was a debt incurred by the old apartheid regime, which we had to pay down at the cost of not being able to deliver to the majority of black and especially African people. We must not forget the literally billions of rands that disappeared from South Africa just before 1994. None of those people who've been involved in the old National Party and in the apartheid regime, who were stealing that money, who ran a fundamentally corrupt system, who ran a system that was declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations, have been brought to book. They managed to continue their lives. They managed to continue to live happily in wealth in the best areas of South Africa. But they are then the people who turn around and come and call the African National Congress and our leaders corrupt. They are suddenly now the paragons of morality. Where on earth can people who have behaved like that come and now call the Secretary General of the ANC without any hard facts, absolute generalizations and speculation, often fake news, often inventions, a book written based on articles that were not properly researched and not even properly written over into proper chapters into that book called Gangster State that was written against Comrade Ace Magashule. Where do those people come from that they think they've got any right, any semblance of right, to come and pass judgment on the current black government in South Africa? They should hang their heads in shame. They should be deeply grateful that they're not all languishing in the prisons where they've put us. Because if justice had to prevail, if they had to be dealt with in terms of the crimes and the corruption that they've committed, they should be languishing in jail. Their behavior today is gross ungratefulness and gross misunderstanding of the magnitude that was shown to them by the majority of the people in this country. And they mustn't push us too far, because they will continue to push to the point where the people of this country will say enough is enough. And I think it must be said clearly, to try and destroy the ANC through unsubstantiated allegations of corruption in order to continue to bring new liberal and revisionist policies and political parties into power in South Africa, we will resist with every fiber and every bone in our bodies.
Okay, I'm just going to try and tie this all in together now. What would you personally think over the past 25 years would be our country's top achievements?
I think the top achievement is that we were able, because of the sacrifices of the majority of people, led by the African National Congress, to bring universal franchise to South Africa. In addition to that, we were able to attend to the most urgent needs of the majority of people in South Africa. No one must ever underestimate the importance of the social welfare network, the net that we have established in South Africa to try and lift a vast majority of people out of dire poverty. And we must understand that that dire poverty was not by accident. It was created by a fundamental unjust system of apartheid that pushed the majority of black and African people right to the bottom of the society. That's our achievement. Our challenge is, how do we now lift people not just out of an existence of subsistence into full economic empowerment? And that is where the African National Congress is going to either succeed or fail. If it fails to do that, the ultimate verdict on the ANC will be a negative one. If it manages to succeed in changing those fundamental economic dynamics that we are dealing with, the verdict will be that it lived up to the ideals that it expressed in the Freedom Charter, the ideals that so many of us went to prison for, the ideals that so many of my fellow comrades died for. You know, just a few weeks ago, we went to the commemoration of Solomon Mahlangu. If you listen to the words of Solomon Mahlangu, when he spoke just before he went to the gallows, he was talking about the plight of the majority of South Africans. He was talking about the plight that he himself and his family, who came out of abject poverty, were experiencing. And people like Solomon Mahlangu should be the torch bearers in our minds as our ancestors of the liberation struggle, to now lead us to take the right decisions.
Just gaze into your crystal ball for me for a second. So we've spoken about the past 25 years. What do you think the next 25 years have in store for us? And I want to kind of tie this into another question that I want to follow up on as well. Last year saw a lot of, and I mean the beginning of this year as well, we saw a lot of xenophobia raising its ugly head again. We also saw a rhetoric by certain political parties on minorities, right? So they're like globally, if you look at how globally it's going right now, almost kind of your right-wing parties are speaking ill about minorities and making them the enemy. So specifically speaking about the coloureds and the Indians in this country, right? Where do you think we're going in the next 25 years? Do we have a space for everyone in South Africa?
Can I use the image that you used, that crystal ball?
Yes, go for it.
And can I say that if I turn the crystal ball on the one side, let me say to the right, to the more conservative policies of continuing simply with new liberal economic policies, all of that, we are not going to address the challenges that we are faced with now. And if we do not address them, I see a very dark future for South Africa. I see an intensification of conflict. I see the danger of more and more of the kind of service delivery protests that we have seen in the last couple of months, intensifying also towards this elections on the 8th of May. And I fear that those protest will become more desperate, more violent, and more destructive. Because under circumstances of simply just having a policy of inclusive growth and new liberal economic policies, the majority of people's circumstances will become more and more dire. The income levels that they have compared to the increase in living expenses will widen that gap. And they will indeed eventually challenge this whole unfair situation. We cannot expect that people will have patience forever. So that is the dark side. The lighter side, and now I'm turning the crystal ball to the left, more radical economic transformation policies that address these injustices, that address the fact that the majority of black people have the right to be in control of this economy, that address the fact that entrepreneurship for black people must be grown and developed, that the fundamental economic structure in this society, which also addresses the issues around the fundamental imbalances that there are in the financial institutions, in the banks. We've just recently had the indication that black people are being penalized for being black when they want to buy property. Why? Because they still continue to live in what was previously the old so-called Group Areas Act apartheid areas. Those areas have got poorer infrastructure, there's higher crime, therefore the risk, according to the bank, is higher. Not taking into consideration this is a consequence of an apartheid system that is still pervasive in South Africa, and therefore they demand from black people who are of lower income, who haven't got the resources that have been accumulated by whites during the apartheid era, they demand from them to pay higher interest, to pay higher bonds. Now that's grossly unfair. So what I'm saying is, if we cannot change that whole structure, the superstructure of the South African economy, we're going to go to the dark side. If we can address it, if we can start giving people hope, if people can feel this country belongs to us, the land gets returned to us without compensation, not in a haphazard, not in a way that can be considered to be anarchistic, but in a structured manner, but making sure that the injustices of the past are addressed, then there will be space. The reason why we have the kind of xenophobic expressions that from time to time boil up in our society is because people are living under circumstances of inadequate resources. So any more pressure on those resources also from people who come from the rest of the African continent into South Africa obviously is going to lead to some kind of conflict. It shouldn't be like that. We should be hugely grateful for the contribution that the whole of the rest of the African continent made to our liberation. We should be one of those societies that throw our arms wide open to the rest of our African brothers and sisters. But we're only going to be able to do so if we are dealing with the resource distribution in this country in a proper way. And let us be clear to each other, there is not a lack of money in South Africa. There's not a lack of resources in South Africa. This country is one of the wealthiest countries in terms of resources and even in terms of the financial base that there is. The problem is not a lack of resources. The problem is the unequal distribution of that lack of resources and the selfishness of those who are haves in this country towards those who do not have. That is the reality. And the unpreparedness of those who are the haves to share with those who do not have. And the unfortunate situation that we've seen in the last couple of years is that there's a small but growing number of black wealthy people who seem to rather buy into the attitudes of the old white monopoly capitalists than making sure that these issues of the majority of black people are addressed. They seem to think that their class position in terms of their association with white monopoly capital is more important than their Africanness. And they're going to regret it, because doing that will eventually backfire on them. So the call that the ANC has to make is that every South African must understand, if we are not going to change this economy and share, we're in for dark times. But we can change it. We can have a better future, because we do have the material resources to do it, if only we can make a change in our minds and stop being selfish.